After the 1948 war, no more than 800,000 Palestinians, and probably considerably fewer, were refugees. Today, the number has swelled to 3.7 million. Does Israel have any obligation to accept all of those? Where would they live? The current Israeli population is 6 million. If every Palestinian was allowed to move back to Israel, that would mean the population would be nearly 10 million. And that would also mean that 40% of the population would now be Palestinian and non-Jewish. Given the birth rate of the Arabs, the Jews would soon be a minority in their own state. The very situation that they fought to avoid in 1948, and which the UN expressly said was unacceptable when it created the partition plan in the first place. Now, Israel's consistently sought a solution to the refugee problem. David Ben-Gurion said as early as 1948 that the refugee issue should be part of a general settlement when the Arab states are ready to conclude a peace treaty. The implied danger of repatriating Arabs who are opposed to its existence did not prevent Israel from allowing some refugees to return and offering to take back a substantial number as a condition for signing a peace treaty. In 1949, Israel offered to allow families that had been separated during the war to return and agreed to repatriate 100,000 refugees as part of the settlement of the conflict. But the Arabs rejected all compromises. They were unwilling to take any action that might be construed as recognition of Israel's right to exist. The result was the confinement of the refugees into camps in Arab states. Now, when it adopted the resolution calling for the repatriation, resettlement, rehabilitation, and compensation of refugees, the UN acknowledged that Israel could not be expected to repatriate a hostile population that would endanger its security. The solution to the problem, like all previous refugee problems, would require at least some Palestinians to be resettled in Arab lands. Again, the Arab states voted against this resolution and demanded that the United Nations assert a right of the Palestinians to return to their homes, and were unwilling to accept anything less until after their defeat in the 48 war became obvious. The Arabs then reinterpreted Resolution 194 as granting the refugees an absolute right of return, and they've demanded that Israel accept this specious interpretation ever since. Current peace talks are based on UN Resolution 242. The Palestinians are not mentioned anywhere in Resolution 242. They're only alluded to in the second clause of the second article, which calls for a just settlement of the refugee problem. And the use of the generic term refugee was a deliberate acknowledgement that two refugee problems existed, one Arab and one Jewish. Furthermore, most Palestinians now live in historic Palestine, which is the area including the Palestinian Authority and Jordan. And when Palestinians speak of the right of return, what they really mean is not just the return to Palestine, but the exact house that they lived in 1947 or 1948. And someone may live in that house, or the house may not exist anymore. Even respected Palestinian leaders have begun to acknowledge that it's a mistake to demand a right of return for refugees to Israel. The Palestinian representative in Jerusalem, Sari Nusieba, for example, said the refugees should be resettled in a future Palestinian state, not in a way that would undermine the existence of the State of Israel as a predominantly Jewish state. In the context of a peace settlement, Israel could be expected to accept some Palestinian refugees, as Ben-Gurion said he would do more than 50 years ago. If and when a Palestinian state is created, many of the refugees should be allowed to move there, though it's hard to imagine how the territory envisioned for a Palestinian state could accommodate so many people. And the Palestinian leadership itself has expressed no great interest in absorbing these refugees.